Hey there guys, and welcome to episode 22 of the Ironman Chattanooga Training Diary here on Gearist TV. My name is Brandon and thank you so much for joining me. If you've been following us along this entire process, you've probably seen all the training videos leading up to this point, and you've also seen the race day videos. And last week we did a video that did my recap, kind of my race report and review of the swim course at Ironman Chattanooga. Today we're going to take a look at the bike course, tell you about how my race went, and give you my general impressions of the course. So first, something I'd like to touch on regarding the bike course was that the general Ironman bike course distance is 112 miles. Now at Ironman Chattanooga, and we knew this going into it, it was going to be longer. It was actually going to be 4 miles, 4.08 miles longer, so 144.68 total miles in the race. So instead of 112, it's going to be 116 on the bike. So when we got out there were a lot of people kind of complaining about this, but at the end of the day, there wasn't a lot you could do about it. So I'll talk a little bit about that as we get more into this section of my race report and review. But first, let's talk about my performance in the race. Now, in past Ironman races, I've really had a lot of trouble carrying my pace through the end. And this wasn't that drastically different, but I didn't have a huge fall off after the first half of the bike. And in this case, I really held much more consistently together, and it went very well for me relative to me. I'm not the speediest biker in the world, but it really went very well. So in terms of pure statistics, for the entire bicycle, 116 miles, averaged 19.9 miles an hour, 19.91 miles an hour, which was 92nd in my division. Now, the first thing that I'll touch on is the gear that I was wearing, because that is important. I sort of talked about it last week when I was talking about transition number 1. I decided for this race that rather than wearing triathlon shorts, specifically triathlon shorts which have a thinner chamois or pad in the crotch and the butt area, I decided to wear cycling apparel. The reason for this is, number 1, it's what I train in almost all the time during the summer. Number 2, it's got that heavier chamois and is going to really be able to stay kind of better padded throughout the course of the bicycle. And number 3, I wear bib shorts. And in this case, I don't want to have to be dealing with shorts that I'm pulling up and things like that. So I decided on a full cycling kit. It was the Laser Elite cycling kit from Louis Garneau. There you go. As for a helmet, I also decided not to wear an aero helmet. Now, why is this? Well, Louisville, even with the generous forecast, the weather that was forecast about 70s, kind of middle to low 70s and overcast, I wanted to be sure that I was going to be cool enough, because I tend to run hot. Now, I do have some rather cool aero helmets that are temperature-wise cool, as well as kind of cool looking, but I also just decided that wearing something that I've been training in all summer, the Giro Aeon, was going to be my best bet at keeping myself regulated and comfortable and not going outside my comfort zone. So that's what I did. Getting onto the bike, I had 2 bottles that I placed that morning, both filled with Goo Brew, the tri-berry version of that. This was to account for my first leg of the bike up until I got to the first aid station. And what wound up happening was that I wound up having actually one of those bottles sitting on my bike for much longer than that. Here's a little race day tip, that if you're doing a long distance race like a half Ironman or a full Ironman, those bottles that are sitting on your bike at the beginning of the day, you're going to lose them most of the time if you're picking up other nutritional on the way. So don't use bottles that have a lot of, intrinsic value to you. Just be able to throw them away in the aid stations and swap them out for new bottles. So I had that ready to go. That was my nutrition. In the jersey, I had salt tablets. I had 8 of those, which turns out not to have been quite enough. I had 8 salt tablets. I also had 2 goos, and a tube of Goo Brew tablets that I could use in the event that I wasn't reacting well with the on-course nutrition. Now, the bike course at Ironman Chattanooga is kind of an interesting one, being that it calls itself Ironman Chattanooga. The only part of the bike course that's in Tennessee is roughly the first 5.5 miles maybe, and then you're in Georgia. So you basically drive straight south. I'll actually put up a map right here. You go straight south, you're in Georgia, you do 2 loops, and then you're back in Tennessee for the final 5.5 miles or so. So it's interesting that most of it takes place in Georgia. Now, in terms of the elevation, I wasn't terribly concerned about it. I knew there were going to be hills, but hey, I live in Boulder County, Colorado. We got hills, trust me. In fact, a lot of my training rides, as you saw during the training series, were up to Brainerd Lake, which is a 5,000 foot climb inside of 20 miles. So This was not nearly as steep a hill as that at any point. As we got going, what I really noticed was that there was some really poor bike handling going on. Now, I don't know why this is exactly, because I've been in other races where it's not quite as bad as I noticed this time. The first thing that I'll mention is the drafting rule. Now, you have to have a 4 bike length space to the person in front of you. However, they're willing to give you some kind of leeway on that when you're going up hills, the accordion thing happens and all that stuff. But this was really consistent, close riding, and nobody was backing off like they're supposed to. Now, the rule when you go to pass somebody, and this is why when you watch races on TV like the Ironman World Championships coming up this coming weekend, when you see somebody at those points that are passing, they're like, and then so-and-so passed this person like a bat shot out of a cannon. The reason it looks like that is because the move that you make to pass somebody has to be a very definitive move. It can't be something where you just kind of mosey on by at your own pace. You have to actually make a move. Now, once that move is made, once front wheels cross one another, it is the duty of the person who has just been overtaken to drop back. Okay, here's the trick. I went to pass some guy at one point, and I knew this guy was going to ride my ass off later on in the race because he was just way more fit than I was, at least in appearances. And of course, you can't always judge a book by its cover. But I just had a sneaking suspicion he was going to. However, at this point we were going up a hill and I was dusting him on hills. So we got to a point, I was going up a hill and I passed this guy. Now here's the trick, is he didn't yield. I needed to get over, or I could be called for some sort of foul and I would have to spend some time in the penalty tent. So I go to try to get over, but his wheel is right there and he will not yield. He was breaking the rules and he was actually blocking. So I kind of pointed like this, and then later on he passes me. He goes, "What was that, man?" And I said, "You were blocking, dude. Pay attention to the rules." So I'm not trying to be a dick on the race course, but please know the rules, because there's some really questionable riding out there that, apart from being against the rules, can be kind of dangerous. I mean, if I had assumed that he were following the rules and just turned back into the general pace of everything, I would have hit him and there would have been a big crash. It's dangerous, so please pay attention to the rules of any race that you're in. Now, as we got going, I noticed for the first portion, probably the first 20 miles of this ride, was a really, really nice pace. It generally was kind of a downhill almost. It felt really great. Wasn't particularly climby. There are a few hills here and there, but just, you know, it really was a very, very nice ride. Along the way, once you got into Georgia, I felt like the aid stations were really well staffed. And most people were standing there holding everything the way they should have. Water bottles right on top of the hand there, so you just grab it and go. They had water bottles, bananas, goos, they had goo chomps, they had Ironman Perform, which is the equivalent of Gatorade basically. And so it was really well done aid stations, and if you've ever done an Ironman before, they're pretty standard for Ironman aid stations. Along the way, since it was on a Sunday, there were a lot of churches that were closed, but there were also some churches out there that were having picnics or things like this and really supporting the races, which was great to see. In fact, all along the race course, the support from the fans in the local community was really great, with a big exception, which I'll talk about in a second. I mean, you saw like older couples hanging out and having their coffee and, like, you know, cereal in the driveway and watching you and ringing a cowbell or something. It was really fantastic. As you went along, none of the hills on this course were particularly overly steep. There was nothing that was going to really kill you. There was one part that I'll talk about in a second which kind of took it out of you for the second loop, but in general, nothing over the top steep or anything like that. Now, as you get out, the race course kind of looks like a chef's knife. And you get down to the one section kind of at the end and you turn, and then you have a nice downhill burner section in there where you can really use that chance to kind of recover from some of the hills on the way out. Because again, it's not very steep in these hills, but it rolls a lot. So if you live in a place like Florida or someplace that's notoriously flat, definitely find yourself a place that you can do hills over and over on, like a bridge or something. So instead of just riding over the hill, going out and doing 10 miles, coming back and going back over the hill or bridge, go over the bridge many, many times and just do it over and over and over, because you're going to need it. Now, the controversy of the day on the race course was in this one area. I came through, and I can't remember which part happened first because it's kind of all a blur. But I'm coming through this area and all of a sudden there's like dirt all over the road, kind of that red Georgia clay. And it's kind of sprinkled across the road, and there's some cones marking off this one area, and there's a police officer kind of guiding cyclists around, an out of uniform police officer guiding cyclists around this area. And it was very strange to me, and I was like, what was that? Why is there dirt on the road? And then later on, as you passed by that same spot a second time, they had gotten more dirt on the road, and kind of, it was really nice and smooth. It wasn't a big deal. Well, it turns out that in that area, somebody who was local, or at least that's the suspicion, somebody had gotten out there and poured motor oil all over the road in this one area as an oil slick to try and hurt and trip up and make cyclists crash. Now, this happens from time to time where there are people in the community that are not happy about the race being there. In fact, at one point, as we were riding in the right-hand lane, because the right-hand lane was essentially shut down to most traffic, a car pulls out of a driveway and then was aggressively driving into and out of the race as they could. And they were like, we have a right to the road too. And there was that person got consequently pulled over by a police officer, and I think cited, because they're creating a danger to cyclists on the road and driving very irresponsibly. And this had been they had been notified of this months in advance. So it wasn't like a surprise, there's a race in your neighborhood. I do understand the logistical issues for people that live within that loop, okay? Even though it's a 50-mile loop, it still creates logistical issues, and I certainly recognize that. I've been caught up in those same things myself before, either here in Colorado or when I was in New York City, where you just can't get out of a certain spot because of the race. I get it, I understand, and I really appreciate that those communities really support the races in general. However, with this oil slick and this person driving aggressively into traffic, it's not creating any goodwill. It's actually really detrimental to the racers from simply a safety standpoint, and it's also riling that person up. So, racers, the first thing you can do is, if you see a situation like that, is be polite to that person that is pulling out in front of you. They think you're an asshole because you're riding a race that they knew about 9 months ago, but you also think they're a dick because they're trying to hit you with their car. Please be friendly, be patient, and just know that they'll be out of your way pretty soon. Now, in this particular case, we actually got stacked up behind this car because they were going slowly up a hill behind some cyclists, and the pack of cyclists I was with was going faster to get up ahead. And I say pack, we were still strung out, but again, it was one of those accordion things that happens on hills. Very dangerous. Now, the next thing that I noticed, as we're getting to this one section, I'm looking around and I'm like, my God, all at once, I'm like, why are there in a quarter-mile span, quarter-mile or less, probably like maybe a quarter mile, there are like 10 people with flat tires. And I look around and I'm like, did I just miss like a massive pothole or something? What is going on there? Well, and I didn't know this until after the fact. I think I heard this somewhere on the run. There were actual tacks sprinkled into the road, we're assuming by the same person that put an oil slick on the road. And these were not your classroom thumbtacks like this. These were tacks that are carpet tacks, that are those fat black tacks that are really very rigid, and either they were painted black or they were just black because that's the color of the metal. Either way, you couldn't see them on the road, and they were ripping people's tires to shreds. It's not like the tires were just getting ruptured. In some cases, it was actually tearing the tire up and not just the tube within the tire, assuming you're running clinchers. So fortunately, I did not get a flat on either loop. In fact, I think they had taken care of it by the second time I came around. But regardless, very dangerous situation, and the police are investigating right now. If I'm not mistaken, there's a $1,000 reward right now for any information that could lead to an arrest in this crime. So it's really very dangerous, and this is even further reason why when you go into a community for a race, please be polite to those locals, because those locals are the ones that make your race better or worse. They're the ones who you are inconveniencing on a given day. So we really want to just bring a lot to their communities in terms of politeness, in terms of picking up trash, in terms of spending money in restaurants and stores and things like that. So please say thank you to locals when you go do a race. It can go a really long way. So then when you got kind of toward the beginning of the transition between loops 1 and 2 on the bicycle, you went through a town called Chickamauga. And Chickamauga had this, that's where the special needs bags were picked up, right about halfway through the bike. And that was great. And when you went through this area, it was so wonderful. The whole town came out and everybody was cheering. And right at that point, it's such a boost. You know, you're 56 or 60 miles or so into the race. You're feeling tired, but you know you've got to do that again and then go run a marathon, lest we forget. But the town was so great and everyone was out and it was just wonderful to see people there really taking an interest in this event that we were taking part in. And so they were there and, you know, cheering and cowbells and screaming and yelling and bands and everything, and it was really, really wonderful. Once you came through Chickamauga, you kind of then had to climb up this hill. And this little climb, which isn't very steep, but it's probably one of the steeper and harder climbs on the course because it's a little bit longer, that thing took me out quite a bit, and I don't think that I rode that very efficiently. Now, once I got out of that, the bike had kind of spread out at that point. You know, people are starting to get tired. Other people who are really, really well trained on the bike are starting to break away and go ahead. But in general, the bike field had really spread out. Now, once I got back onto the course, what I noticed in the whole entire second loop is a lot of peloton riding. Now, riding in packs and drafting in general in an Ironman is not legal. It is disallowed. It is dangerous to ride in aero position, number one, in a pack. And secondarily, it's a very individual event. It is not legal to ride in packs. If you ever see a triathlon where people are riding in packs, it is a draft legal race, and more probably than that, it is an ITU race that is meant for professionals to race in a draft legal setting. That doesn't happen in Ironman races. Now, I noticed these little packs would come bombing by me, and I started to pick up on the fact that a lot of these people that were coming bombing by me are people that I had gone by in the first section of the bike, not just blowing by them, but I had passed them because they were working hard. These same people were now parked in the middle of groups of peloton, groups of riders that would come by, in some cases groups as large as like 15 to 20 people, blowing by you. Now, you know that apart from the fact that these people are doing something that's not legal, one of those things that they're doing is they're really recuperating their legs for the second half because you're able to hide in a pack. Of course, you still have to work going up hills and things like that, but these guys would come bombing by you, and it was just unbelievable. And the first thing I was thinking is, I'm going, if these people had that much energy to ride that fast on the second loop, where the hell were they in the first loop, and why weren't they passing me then? So even though I was getting tired and getting passed by these groups at like 80 or 90 miles into the race, I kept saying to myself, don't give in and don't sit on the back of one of those groups of riders. Just stay out of it. Now, and I did. But by the time that last one came through, it was like mile 85 or 90 or so, I was so over getting passed by these guys. And when I say pass, I don't just mean, they were passing me going like 25 miles an hour. It was like I was standing still because you're going down a hill and I'm kind of resting and coasting a little bit and be going maybe like 19 or 20 miles an hour. These guys come flying by like they've got motorized bikes. I digress. By the time the last one goes by me, and I'm like, you know what, screw it. That's it. The next Peloton group that goes by, I'm sitting on the back of it, and I'm going to get some recuperation in my own legs. That was the last one that I saw. So, 'tis what it is. Then we rode back into town, and upon getting back into town, I was actually riding beside some guy, which is also not allowed. But at that point, well, I'm not drafting off him, he's not drafting off me. We're just having a conversation about our kids and about the race and stuff like that. So it was really more of a thing where we're just having fun with each other and talking and things like that. So yes, it's illegal to be beside somebody like that because you're kind of taking up more road real estate, but the cycling group was so stretched out by then that only one person would come by every now and then, and they still had the majority of the lane to pass. So it just happens. So you kind of come back into the city, and I gotta be honest, on an Ironman ride, I have never felt so good as I did. Now, don't get me wrong, I was tired, And I'm not saying the bike course was easy, but I was definitely feeling better than I ever have in my previous Ironman attempts. At Ironman Wisconsin 2009, which I completed, or Ironman Louisville in 2010, which I medical DNF'd. So coming back into town was great. And actually, I was at the dismount line way quicker than I thought. It was pretty, you kind of come around and it's like you're there all of a sudden. So I kind of got off, went into transition number 2, and got myself ready to run. So that's where I'm going to end it with my portion of the race for today. And we'll talk about the run when we get into the next stuff. But my general impressions of the bike course are that it is great. I had a good time. It's not a super flat course like Florida or something like that. It's definitely a course that has the ability to challenge you. However, if you train properly, it's also a course that you can really ride well. The hills aren't that steep that you can't go through the top of them and ride through the top of them. So what I would encourage you to do, even if it's a sprint, Olympic distance, half Ironman, or Ironman, is that when you're doing something where it's particularly rolly, not something that's super steep like Tahoe or Canada, which is Challenge Penticton now, or like Placid, not something that's steep like that, but something where you don't have long climbs, but in general mostly rollers, is to ride through the top. Pedal through the top and pedal on the downhill. If you can do that, what you're going to do is allow your legs to basically spin out that lactic acid that's going to kick up immediately if you stop pedaling. Kick it out a little bit, so maybe ride halfway down the hill, and if you really want to coast as you get halfway down the hill and take a little bit of a rest. But you're going to feel much better if you can pedal through the top. As I mentioned, I feel like the crowd support on this race was awesome. I mean, seriously, Chattanooga and northern Georgia and Chickamauga and all that where we were, you guys kick ass. That was such a wonderful job of crowd support, and in my opinion. Now, some people may have had other opinions of it, but I thought it was really, really wonderful. And what I noticed was that all the aid stations, I had to stop at, I think, 2 aid stations to use the bathroom to pee. At each aid station where I stopped, there were 2 people standing right by the porta-johns to hold bikes and to rack them in some cases while you went in to pee, which was excellent. In the past, you maybe had to lean your bike up against the porta-john or put it on the ground or whatever, which isn't a huge deal, but this was great because they would take it, they would stand there, they'd say, can I get you anything while you're in the bathroom? And you say, no, or, yeah, I'd like some water, some Perform, or whatever, and they would go and get it for you and then come back. So really well done race. On the bike course was excellent. There were those issues with the tacks and the oil, and I actually have heard that they're going to readjust the bike course to get it to 112 miles for next year's race. I'm not sure if that's in stone yet, and I don't think they've announced the course yet, but I will try to give you an update on that when the opportunity presents itself. So I want to know if you guys have ever done a century ride. Have you ever ridden 100 miles or 112 miles or 116 miles? I want to hear, so please let me know in the comments section below. Now, in the next episode of this series and the final episode of the Ironman Chattanooga video diary series, I'm going to be talking about transition number 2, the run and the finish, and my general take on the race. So definitely stick around, come on back, subscribe to our channel. You can click right over here, the YouTube button, any of our social media networks up here, including Strava right up there at the top, which Strava is where I logged all my training while doing this, doing the training for this event. So be sure to join Strava. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you've got any questions, I'd be happy to hear them. You can either contact us by going to Gearist.com, here's the link right there, or by clicking into the comment section below and leaving a question. And if you really want to, you can email info@gearist.com. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.